Yin Hambath, Yareru Hanat Nitwood Nacha.
Ancient Egyptian workers had a secret weapon against their bosses, and it wasn't brute force. It was fake injuries, broken tools, and some very creative math. These weren't just acts of defiance. They were survival moves in a world where disobedience meant death. This is the untold story of how laborers outwitted one of history's harshest systems with nothing but wit, sabotage, and a few very well-trained birds. Picture this. You're an Egyptian scribe, reed pen in hand, when the overseer announces the season's grain quota just doubled. The workers can't possibly meet it, but you're the one who has to record the numbers. What do? You grab a second scroll. Scribes were stuck in the middle, trusted by the state to keep records, but living side by side with the workers they documented. When quotas jumped unexpectedly, workers physically couldn't produce more, but shortages meant punishments for everyone, especially the scribe who recorded the failure. Some figured out a solution: double bookkeeping. One official record showed what the overseers wanted to see. The real numbers lived on a second set of scrolls. Archaeologists found proof in papyri like the Turin taxation papyrus, where scribbled corrections and crossed-out numbers suggest last-minute adjustments. One record might claim 300 sacks of grain reached storage, while hidden notes showed only 250 actually made it. The missing 50? Diverted to feed workers' families or traded for better tools. Getting caught meant brutal consequences. A scribe named Amenemhat wrote frantic letters complaining about beatings after his numbers didn't add up. Penalties ranged from lashings to hard labor in desert quarries, basically a death sentence. Yet scribes kept taking the risk. Here's why. Most scribes came from the same villages as the workers. Their brothers hauled stones, their cousins farmed fields. When drought hit or quotas spiked, turning a blind eye meant your own people ate. It wasn't just kindness. Villages where workers starved produced fewer scribes next season. Even Pharaoh's bureaucracy depended on this unspoken deal. Look the other way, or the whole system collapses. The best scribes mastered the art of plausible deniability, a smudged numeral here, a lost shipment there, enough gaps to feed people, but not so many that inspectors got suspicious. Some even developed code systems, using dotted lines or specific ink colors to flag altered entries. But creative accounting only went so far. When numbers were too outrageous to fudge, workers had to get more hands-on with their resistance. And let's just say, ancient Egyptians could fake an injury like Broadway actors. You're hauling a limestone block under the sun, sweat stinging your eyes, when someone at the front starts a slow, rhythmic chant. The whole crew joins in, rocking the block back and forth just a little longer than needed. Welcome to the original stone-carrying game, where looking busy was its own art form. Ancient Egyptian workers didn't just drag their feet, they made it look like an Olympic sport. Quotas were so high they'd shame today's productivity apps, but tomb paintings show crews moving in perfect formation at a pace that wouldn't impress anyone. Archaeologists have found tool marks on unfinished stones, where workers took extra chisel taps per inch, stretching out the job. One quarry inscription even complains about men who work as snails. The stumble step was another favorite. As harvesters neared the storage huts, someone would trip, grain would spill, and suddenly everyone had a reason to stop and clean up. These tactics weren't just random. Workers coordinated slowdowns with subtle signals: a dropped basket, a chant, or a drawn-out carrying dance. Overseers grumbled about lazy hands in graffiti at Deir el Medina, but punishing a whole crew meant risking even bigger delays. So an unspoken deal formed. As long as the project inched forward, everyone looked the other way. Inscriptions and letters from the period mention work crews dragging out tasks for days, sometimes until overseers finally lowered quotas or relaxed deadlines. The real trick was timing. Workers saved their best performances for right before festivals or after payday, when everyone wanted to get home early. A conveniently misplaced mallet on a Friday could mean an unexpected break for all. And if an inspector showed up, suddenly everyone moved with the energy of a festival parade until the official left and the slow motion routine returned. But dragging stones and stretching tasks could only get you so far. When the quotas kept rising and the sun kept beating down, sometimes the only way out was to fake a little pain, just enough to convince the overseer that you really couldn't haul another block. Ever wish calling in sick actually stopped your boss in his tracks? Ancient Egyptian workers practically invented that move. On building sites and in the fields, real injuries happened all the time. Hauling stones and swinging hammers wasn't exactly gentle on the body, but some accidents seemed to pop up at just the right moment, and no overseer wanted to risk ignoring a genuine complaint. A worker's diary from Deir el Medina describes how a crew responded when the foreman suddenly added 2 extra stone blocks to their daily quota. By mid-morning, a few men started rubbing their shoulders and wincing. By lunchtime, half the crew was limping on the same leg. The foreman threatened them, but in the end, he cut the load rather than lose the entire day's work. These outbreaks weren't random. Workers watched each other for cues. One man would clutch his back after lifting a basket, and within an hour, others copied him, moving like their joints had turned to stone. Overseers tried to test these complaints by assigning easier tasks, hoping to catch someone faking it. If you got caught, you might end up cleaning latrines for a month, but most workers knew how to play the game. The best fakers made it look real. There's a story about a tomb builder who kept a loose brick nearby so he could trip and scrape his knee when an inspector walked past. Real blood, real limp, and perfectly timed for a sudden drop in quota. Medical papyri from the period show that workers were experts in picking common complaints like twisted ankles or sudden back pain, the kind of injuries that were hard to prove or disprove. Sometimes, mass injuries became a bargaining chip. During the reign of Ramses III, a crew carving tombs staged a slow-motion rebellion. First, a couple of men, then dozens, all reporting hand tremors that made fine carving impossible. The project switched to simpler designs and bigger chisels, much easier work for everyone. But the real genius was in the details. Crews never all faked the same injury at once. Instead, you'd see a mix of limps, sore arms, and blurry vision, enough variety to sound believable, but enough consistency to slow the whole project down. Overseers could threaten and punish, but arguing with 50 men about their sudden aches was a losing battle. Even a pharaoh couldn't order a miracle cure. Still, faking injuries was just one trick. Some workers found even sneakier ways to get back at the system, ways that involved a little help from the animal kingdom. Imagine you're the gardener who just trained your own rebel squad of birds. The priests keep taking your best lettuce for the gods, but this time, you've got a plan. Sacred ibises wander everywhere, and everyone knows you can't touch a bird blessed by Thoth. Some painted fragments suggest gardeners may have hand-fed these birds, and workers figured out how to use that to their advantage. Temple records start to show a suspicious pattern. Offerings vanish at just the right times, always when certain gardeners are on shift. Inspectors leave frustrated notes about sacred birds grown bold, but on the ground, workers quietly encourage the chaos. The trick is simple. A gardener accidentally spills grain near an open window, and an ibis waddles in to snatch what it can. When the priests complain, workers just shrug. Who's going to punish a creature sacred to the gods? Ostraca from Deir el Medina show scenes of workers feeding ibises, and one even shows a bird grabbing bread while a worker looks away. Priests tried to fight back with nets and extra guards, but workers just moved their feeding spots, letting the birds raid rival storerooms instead. When inspectors posted warnings like, "Let no man feed the messengers of Thoth near the granary," workers simply fed the birds just outside the gates. The back and forth never really ended. The scale of the sabotage was impossible to ignore. Significant portions of temple offerings vanished when certain workers were on duty, and grain stores reported ibises figuring out how to untie sack knots. Workers also took advantage of the birds' love for shiny things, using a tossed copper tool to distract them, and sometimes something valuable would disappear in the confusion. Overseers suspected sabotage, but blaming the birds was safer than accusing a worker. Punishing a sacred animal was unthinkable, and punishing the staff risked angering the gods. Birds weren't the only animal accomplices either. Geese were trained to honk when inspectors approached, and cats were encouraged to prowl near fish stores. The genius of the whole system was its deniability. Animals will be animals after all. And when the birds had done their part, it was time for the workers to get creative with something even more powerful than a beak or a wing: the numbers. Picture yourself as a grain clerk in Thebes. Word spreads: the vizier's inspectors will be checking storerooms tomorrow. You're 20 sacks short this month, enough to earn a beating if anyone notices. But in ancient Egypt, knowing how to count could be just as valuable as knowing how to hide things. With multiple grain measures and odd ratios, it was easy to mask small losses. Ancient scribes understood unit conversions well enough to exploit them. If you reported your grain in one unit instead of another, you could make a few sacks disappear and blame it on a conversion error. The math problems in the Rhind mathematical papyrus show how flexible the numbers could be. If you only had 90 loaves for 100 men, there was always a way to fudge the math and keep the officials happy. Workers and clerks took full advantage of these loopholes. They'd weigh damp grain straight from the Nile, making the numbers look better than they were. On the transport routes, a spilled basket here and there meant a little extra grain for someone's family. Baskets with thicker walls held less but looked full, and no one wanted to argue with a basket. Inspectors weren't clueless. The sharpest ones brought their own measuring jars and sometimes rubbed oil on their hands to check for damp grain. Still, workers had their own tricks. They learned the safe limit. Temple records show around 5% loss was considered normal. Anything more, and questions started. But how did they coordinate that precisely across hundreds of workers? We'll see next. Every year, tax records from the Ramesside period show the same pattern: shortages that never quite cross the line from bad luck to someone stealing. Scribes developed subtle signals, like a certain way of stacking sacks, to warn others which batches were light. New workers learned how to tip the scales just enough to stay under the radar. If someone got greedy, like the clerk caught changing a 10 to a 40 on a linen shipment, the punishment was swift and public. But most kept things quiet, spreading out the losses so no one person took the fall. It wasn't just about clever math or sneaky baskets. The real secret was silent teamwork, a system that let hundreds of people move as one, even when they couldn't risk saying a word. You feel the overseer's eyes on your back, so you tap your chisel twice against the sandstone. The worker next to you hears it and passes the message along. Within minutes, the whole crew is moving just a bit slower, and the rhythm of work shifts without a word spoken. This was the whisper network of Egyptian work crews. With overseers always watching, workers learned to communicate in ways that wouldn't get them caught. A loud cough when an inspector approached. A sandal dragged across the ground to signal, "Take your break now." Wall sketches hint at hand signals used behind backs, all while pretending to focus on the job. At Deir el Medina, archaeologists found clues to entire systems of secret signals. Crews swapped stone chips palm to palm to rotate out of the worst jobs. Hauling songs hid coded verses. One line meant speed up, another meant slow down, and sometimes a verse was a warning to watch out for the overseer. These codes let workers coordinate without ever speaking openly. Overseers weren't clueless. Some tried to crack the codes, and one frustrated foreman even wrote about workers speaking through their tools. But punishing one person never stopped the network. New hires picked up the basics fast. A finger brushed under the nose meant look busy, while scratching an elbow told you to share water with someone who'd been whipped. Regional crews developed their own variations. Quarry workers used hammer taps, while irrigation teams had their own set of shovel signals. At Karnak, workers used the temple's echo to bounce warnings to distant teams. Temporary crews invented new codes on the spot, leaning on a shovel in a certain way or standing with a hand on the hip could say everything you needed. The real trick was making these signals work across language barriers. Egyptian gangs mixed locals, Nubians, and Libyans who didn't share a common tongue. So they relied on physical cues, exaggerated stretches, fake sneezes, even blinking patterns. No matter where you came from, you could pick up the basics in a day. But when even the best silent signals failed, crews turned to their final, unbeatable weapon: religion. The sun beats down as you haul bricks toward the half-built temple. You pause, squint at the sky, and then drop to the ground. When you wake up, you're babbling about a vision from Hathor. It's no coincidence. Today's job involves carrying heavy stones up some pretty sketchy scaffolding. Religion was the ultimate excuse for Egyptian workers. Claim a message from the gods, and even the strictest overseer hesitated. Temple records show cases where workers fainted and woke up with warnings from Anubis or Thoth. Texts mention claims of temporary blindness or mysterious fevers, all conveniently timed to avoid the worst jobs. One documented purification ritual at Abydos delayed work for days after laborers insisted the Nile had turned blood red, a likely result of silt from seasonal winds, but nobody was taking chances with omens. Overseers faced a tough call. Ignore a supposed warning from the gods, and you risked blame if something went wrong. Stop work for every vision, and the project ground to a halt. Most played it safe. A work log from Abydos records an entire week lost after 3 laborers claimed to see omens in the water, forcing the foreman to call for rituals. Workers got creative, adding a bit of performance art with herbs and dramatic visions to make their stories convincing. Some timed their collapses with festivals, when everyone was already on edge about the gods walking among them. Drop a line like, "Amun spoke to me," and suddenly you had a few days off for prayers. Of course, you couldn't push your luck. The Turin judicial papyrus mentions a porter who faked too many visions and ended up forced to channel the gods by hauling stones alone. Crews learned to rotate who claimed the visions, and they kept the details vague. Negative energies near the Western Wall was just mysterious enough to buy time without being easily disproved. Patterns emerged. More visions happened during the hottest weeks or right before the most dangerous jobs. Quarry memos complained that every time a vertical shaft needed clearing, someone would have a premonition of collapse. Workers even played the religious calendar. On overlapping festival days, they'd claim the gods gave them conflicting orders, making work impossible. Priests sometimes joined in. At Deir el-Bahri, a note lists offerings given to a priest in exchange for declaring a work site spiritually unclean for 2 weeks. It wasn't just about superstition. It was a practical tactic, and everyone knew it. Even Egypt's finest bureaucracy struggled when ancient HR met religious loopholes. For all the pharaoh's power, sometimes the only thing that could slow the machine was a well-timed vision. The real marvel of Egypt isn't the pyramids. It's the quiet genius of the people who built them. Those stones moved because workers faked injuries, trained thief birds, and kept two sets of books. Hidden in the cracks of Pharaoh's perfect system, they left their real legacy: graffiti of overseers with donkey ears, sick days called by fake visions, and chisel marks just slightly off-center. These weren't helpless slaves. They were experts at gaming one of history's strictest bureaucracies. If you see a slightly lopsided chisel mark, that might be your 4,000-year-old act of sabotage. If you enjoyed these ancient workplace hacks, let us know which tactic you'd try in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. Small acts of defiance built the biggest monuments on Earth.